The morning of March 6, 1944, over the industrial heart of Berlin, Bombardier Second Lieutenant Carl Norden Jr. hunched over an instrument that bore his father's name. Through the plexiglass nose of a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress at 23,000 feet, the German capital spread below like a geometric puzzle of smoke, steel, and stone. The temperature inside the aircraft hovered near 20 degrees below zero. Ice crystals formed on the interior metal surfaces. The oxygen mask pressed uncomfortably against Norden's face as he peered through the eyepiece of the Mark 15 Norden Bombsight, waiting for the precise moment when mathematics, machinery, and fate would converge. The bombsight itself weighed roughly 50 pounds, a complex arrangement of gears, gyroscopes, and optical components that represented more than 2 decades of obsessive engineering refinement. Its inventor, Carl Norden Sr., a Dutch engineer who had emigrated to America, had promised the military establishment something that seemed impossible: the ability to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. German intelligence officers, reading translated American newspaper accounts and intercepted technical communications, had dismissed this claim as transparent propaganda. Their own bombing doctrine emphasized medium-altitude attacks, typically between 8,000 and 12,000 feet, where visual identification remained possible and accuracy could be achieved through experienced crews and favorable conditions. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Germans had encountered captured Norden bombsights before. A B-17 had crashed in Tunisia in early 1943, its bombsight intact. German technicians transported the device to the Luftwaffe testing facility at Rechlin, where engineers and intelligence specialists spent weeks disassembling, examining, and attempting to understand the American approach to precision bombing. Their conclusion, documented in reports that circulated through Luftwaffe headquarters, reflected a mixture of technical appreciation and strategic dismissal. The device demonstrated sophisticated gyroscopic stabilization and clever mechanical computing capabilities. But the fundamental concept that bomber crews could accurately strike specific industrial targets from altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet under combat conditions struck German analysts as fundamentally impractical. Their skepticism rested on substantial operational experience. The Luftwaffe had conducted strategic bombing operations against British targets during 1940 and 1941. German crews discovered quickly that precision bombing, even at moderate altitudes, proved extraordinarily difficult under real combat conditions. Weather obscured targets. Smoke from previous bomb hits created visual obstacles. Anti-aircraft fire forced evasive maneuvers that disrupted careful approach procedures. Enemy fighters attacked during bombing runs, creating chaos and forcing crews to abandon precise aiming for survival. The psychological pressure of combat degraded crew performance in ways that peacetime testing never revealed. German intelligence assessments concluded that American claims about the Norden bombsight represented psychological warfare rather than operational reality. The device might function adequately under ideal testing conditions at American proving grounds, where crews faced no opposition, weather remained favorable, and targets sat clearly visible. But actual combat over heavily defended German industrial centers would expose the fundamental limitations of any mechanical bombing aid, regardless of its sophistication. The Americans, German analysts reasoned, would eventually recognize these practical limitations and adopt area bombing tactics similar to British Bomber Command, which had abandoned precision bombing doctrine after suffering unsustainable losses during daylight operations in 1941. This assessment would prove partially correct in ways German intelligence never anticipated, while simultaneously underestimating American commitment to precision bombing doctrine and the genuine technological achievement the Norden bombsight represented, despite its eventual operational limitations. Part 2. Building the World, the American Doctrine. The doctrine of precision daylight bombing had emerged from American strategic thinking during the interwar period, developed primarily by officers at the Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field, Alabama. These theorists, influenced by Italian air power advocate Giulio Douhet but adapting his ideas to American strategic circumstances, argued that modern industrial economies contained specific vulnerable nodes. Destroy the ball-bearing factories, the theory suggested, and tank production ceases. Eliminate synthetic oil refineries, and the Luftwaffe stays grounded. Precision attacks against carefully selected targets would prove more efficient than the indiscriminate area bombing that destroyed worker housing and civilian morale, but left industrial capacity largely intact. This doctrine required two critical technological components. First, bomber aircraft capable of defending themselves against fighter attacks through heavy defensive armament, allowing daylight operations where visual bombing remained possible. The B-17 Flying Fortress, with its multiple gun positions and sturdy construction, emerged as the platform designed to fulfill this requirement. Second, a bombsight sufficiently accurate to strike specific buildings from altitudes high enough to complicate anti-aircraft fire while providing some protection from fighter interception. Carl Norden Sr. had begun developing his bombsight during the 1920s, working initially for the Navy before Army Air Corps interest secured additional funding. The device employed a stabilized optical system connected to an analog computer that continuously calculated the complex ballistics problem of dropping bombs from a moving aircraft at altitude. The bombardier input airspeed, altitude, and wind conditions. The bombsight's mechanical computer processed these variables, accounting for the bomb's trajectory as it fell through progressively denser air while the aircraft continued forward. At the proper release point, the bombsight either automatically released the bombs or provided the bombardier with visual indicators for manual release. The military services classified the Norden Bombsight at the highest secrecy levels. Bombardiers took formal oaths never to discuss the device's technical details. Guards watched over bombsights during training flights. After each mission, crews removed the bombsights from aircraft and stored them in secure vaults. In the event of aircraft loss, bombardiers carried specific orders to destroy the bombsight before abandoning the aircraft. This security theater served multiple purposes, protecting genuine technological advantages, certainly, but also creating psychological mystique around American bombing capabilities that might influence enemy assessments and planning. American training programs for bombardiers emphasized the Norden's capabilities extensively. Instructors at bombardier schools across the United States taught the mechanical operation of the device through countless practice sessions. Trainees spent hours in link bombing trainers, early simulators that allowed practice without expensive flight time. The training curriculum emphasized precision, discipline, and the bombardier's critical responsibility for mission success. Each man learned that he carried an instrument representing millions of dollars in development, investment, and years of engineering refinement. The doctrine and the technology reflected distinctively American approaches to warfare. Precision bombing emphasized efficiency and specific military objectives over broader destruction. The sophisticated mechanical computer represented American engineering capabilities and manufacturing precision. The entire system assumed that technology, properly applied with trained personnel, could achieve results that traditional methods could not match. These assumptions would face severe testing over the skies of occupied Europe, where German defences and European weather conditions created operational environments far removed from the clear skies and undefended ranges of training bases in Texas and New Mexico. Part 3. German Intelligence Assessment Oberst Joseph Kammhuber, responsible for analyzing Allied bombing capabilities during 1943, studied the available intelligence on American bombing doctrine with professional thoroughness. The evidence suggested that American air planners had committed themselves to a fundamentally flawed strategic concept that German air defenses could exploit systematically. German intelligence had accumulated substantial information about American bombing equipment and training through multiple sources. Luftwaffe intelligence officers interrogated captured American aircrews extensively, pressing for details about bombing procedures, equipment capabilities, and training emphasis. These interrogations occurred at Dulag Luft, the Luftwaffe's central interrogation facility located near Frankfurt, where experienced intelligence officers employed psychological techniques refined over years of questioning captured Allied personnel. The Americans, despite training to resist interrogation, often revealed useful information through casual conversation or responses to seemingly innocent questions. Captured technical manuals provided additional insights. When B-17 seconds crashed on German-controlled territory, salvage teams recovered not only aircraft components, but also documentation that crews had failed to destroy completely. These papers, though often fragmentary or damaged, revealed American procedures, performance specifications, and operational expectations. German translators worked systematically through captured materials, extracting every useful detail. The examination of the captured Norden Bombsight at Rechlin during 1943 provided the most detailed technical intelligence. German optical specialists appreciated the quality of the bombsight's lenses and prisms. Mechanical engineers studied the gyroscopic stabilization system with professional interest. The analog computing mechanism demonstrated clever design that solved complex ballistics calculations through mechanical means. But the fundamental assessment remained skeptical about operational effectiveness under combat conditions. German engineers noted specific limitations that combat experience would likely expose. The bombsight required stable flight during the bombing run, typically lasting several minutes while the device calculated the release point. This stability requirement meant bombers could not execute evasive maneuvers during the critical final approach, creating a predictable target for anti-aircraft gunners. Weather conditions significantly affected performance. Cloud cover prevented visual bombing entirely. High winds at altitude introduced variables that could only be estimated rather than measured precisely. The device assumed certain atmospheric conditions that might not match actual weather over the target. The psychological dimension concerned German analysts as much as technical factors. Combat created stress that degraded human performance in documented ways. Bombardiers operating under fire, watching fellow aircraft explode around them, tracking attacking fighters while attempting to maintain concentration on bombing procedures. These conditions bore no resemblance to peacetime training environments. The Americans had invested enormous resources in a bombing system that assumed crews could maintain precision performance under circumstances that made such precision extraordinarily difficult. Kamhuber's assessment, circulated to Luftwaffe commanders and anti-aircraft artillery units, emphasized that German defenses should force American bombers either to bomb from higher altitudes where accuracy would suffer dramatically, or to accept unsustainable losses if they attempted to maintain medium-altitude attacks. The Norden Bombsight, regardless of its technical sophistication, could not overcome the fundamental reality that precision bombing under heavy defensive fire required conditions that defending forces could systematically deny. This confidence in defensive capabilities rested on German operational experience and a reasonable assessment of practical limitations that any bombing system faced. What German intelligence failed to anticipate was American willingness to accept substantial losses while refining tactics and the eventual development of long-range escort fighters that would transform the strategic bombing campaign, in ways that rendered many German defensive assumptions obsolete. The bombsight itself would prove both more capable and more limited than either side initially believed. Second Lieutenant Robert Morgan arrived at Midland Army Airfield in Texas during July 1942 to begin bombardier training. The facility, one of several specialized bombardier schools established across the American Southwest, had been constructed specifically to produce the precision bombing specialists that daylight bombing doctrine required. The training program lasted 18 weeks and combined classroom instruction with practical flying experience that emphasized the Norden Bombsight's operation under progressively challenging conditions. The curriculum began with basic principles. Instructors explained ballistics, trajectory calculations, and the variables affecting bomb flight. Trainees learned about terminal velocity, how bombs accelerated through thinner air at altitude before reaching maximum speed in denser air at lower altitudes. They studied wind drift, the horizontal displacement caused by prevailing winds at various altitudes. They learned about the trail angle, the point behind the aircraft where bombs would impact based on forward velocity and altitude. These concepts, expressed through mathematical formulas and practical demonstrations, formed the theoretical foundation that the Norden Bombsight automated through mechanical computation. The bombsight itself received reverential treatment during instruction. Guards escorted the devices from secure storage to training aircraft. Bombardiers signed for each bombsight personally, accepting responsibility for its security. Instructors emphasized repeatedly that this instrument represented America's most closely guarded bombing secret, a technological advantage that enemy forces desperately sought to obtain and understand. This security emphasis created psychological investment in the device's capabilities while reinforcing the bombardier's critical role in mission success. Physical operation required considerable practice before bombardiers achieved proficiency. The sight picture through the eyepiece showed a complex arrangement of crosshairs, reference marks, and the target area visible far below. The bombardier manipulated control knobs to input airspeed, altitude, and wind estimates while keeping the crosshairs aligned with the target during the entire bombing run. The device's gyroscopes maintained stability despite aircraft movements. The mechanical computer continuously recalculated the release point as conditions changed. At the proper moment, the bombsight either triggered automatic release or illuminated an indicator showing the bombardier when to press the manual release button. Training flights from Midland occurred under nearly ideal conditions. Texas weather provided clear skies most days. Training ranges featured clearly marked targets with distinctive visual references. No enemy fighters attacked during practice runs. No anti-aircraft fire forced evasive maneuvers or created psychological pressure. Instructors emphasized precision, tracking each trainee's bombing accuracy through hundreds of practice drops. The goal's circular error, probable within several hundred feet from 20,000 feet, seemed achievable under these controlled circumstances. Morgan qualified as a bombardier in November 1942, with scores demonstrating acceptable accuracy under training conditions. Like thousands of other young bombardiers completing training at facilities across America, he had internalized the doctrine of precision bombing and confidence in the Norden Bombsight's capabilities. The device worked as advertised during training. Careful adherence to procedures produced accurate results. The distinction between training conditions and combat operations over heavily defended German industrial targets remained theoretical, something discussed in classrooms but not yet experienced personally. The contrast between American and German bombardier training reflected broader differences in strategic doctrine and resources. German bomber crews, trained primarily for tactical support of ground operations rather than strategic bombing, received less specialized training in precision bombing techniques. The Luftwaffe had developed competent bombsights, including the Luftfernrohr series that equipped German bombers, but German doctrine emphasized medium-altitude attacks against tactical targets rather than high-altitude precision strikes against specific industrial facilities. German bombardiers typically trained for shorter periods, with less emphasis on the kind of precision attacks that American doctrine prioritized. By early 1943, when the 8th Air Force began sustained operations against German targets from bases in England, the American bomber force consisted largely of crews trained under conditions radically different from combat reality. They had learned procedures and developed confidence in equipment under circumstances that bore limited resemblance to operations over defended territory. Weather in England differed dramatically from Texas or New Mexico. European weather patterns brought frequent cloud cover, limiting visual bombing opportunities. German defences had been refined through years of combat experience against British night bombing. The collision between American training assumptions and European operational reality would occur gradually, through accumulated missions that systematically revealed the gap between doctrinal expectations and practical results. August 17, 1943 marked the 8th Air Force's first deep penetration raid against Schweinfurt, a medium-sized Bavarian city whose importance far exceeded its size. Schweinfurt contained factories producing approximately half of Germany's ball-bearing output, making it a theoretically ideal target for precision bombing doctrine. Destroy these specific facilities, American planners reasoned, and German tank, aircraft, and vehicle production would suffer catastrophic disruption from bearing shortages. The mission profile reflected precision bombing theory translated into operational orders. 315 B-17 seconds would strike 2 target complexes, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and aircraft manufacturing facilities at Regensburg. The Regensburg force would continue south to bases in North Africa after bombing, avoiding the return flight over defended territory. The Schweinfurt force would return to England after the attack. Fighter escorts would accompany the bombers to the limit of their range, approximately the German border, then return to base. The bombers would proceed unescorted to the targets, execute precision attacks using Norden bombsights, then fight their way back to the escort rendezvous point. The planning assumed that tight defensive formations and concentrated firepower from dozens of heavy machine guns per bomber would provide adequate protection during the unescorted portion. German fighters, facing this defensive fire, would break off attacks before inflicting unsustainable losses. The bombardiers would maintain stable bombing runs despite enemy action, using their Norden bombsights to place bombs precisely on the factory buildings visible from 24,000 feet. The mission would demonstrate that daylight precision bombing could work against heavily defended targets, despite the absence of escort fighters during critical mission phases. Reality diverged from planning immediately. Weather delayed takeoff, destroying the careful timing that should have overwhelmed German defenses through simultaneous attacks from multiple directions. German radar detected the formations while they were still over the English Channel, providing ample warning time for fighter units across Germany to prepare interception. When escort fighters reached their fuel limits and turned back near the German border, Luftwaffe fighters swarmed the bomber formations in coordinated attacks that demonstrated tactical sophistication developed through years of combat experience. German fighter pilots had learned that B-17 seconds, despite their heavy defensive armament, possessed vulnerable approach angles and that sustained attacks would eventually overwhelm defensive fire through sheer persistence. They attacked from head-on, closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, firing cannons and machine guns during brief firing opportunities before breaking away beneath the bomber formations. They coordinated attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, forcing gunners to divide attention and creating gaps in defensive coverage. They focused particular attention on bombers that showed damage or fell out of formation, finishing off crippled aircraft before they could return safely to England. Inside the bombers, the experience bore no resemblance to training flights over Texas ranges. Aircraft shuddered from cannon strikes. Flak bursts created black smoke clouds that formations had to fly through, steel fragments tearing through aluminum skin and finding hydraulic lines, control cables, and human bodies. Oxygen systems failed in damaged aircraft, forcing crews to choose between slow suffocation at altitude or descending to levels where German fighters could attack more easily. Wounded crew members needed immediate medical attention that proved impossible to provide adequately under combat conditions. Dead crew members remained at their positions because combat circumstances prevented moving bodies. The bombardiers, trained to maintain focus during extended bombing runs, confronted conditions that made precision bombing extraordinarily difficult. Evasive maneuvers to avoid flak bursts disrupted the stable flight that Norden bombsights required. Smoke from earlier bomb hits obscured target details. Attacking fighters forced bombardiers to abandon bomb sites temporarily, watching for threats rather than maintaining concentration on bombing procedures. The psychological pressure of watching dozens of aircraft explode around them, parachutes appearing as crews abandoned burning bombers, created stress levels that training had never approximated. Despite these conditions, many bombardiers maintained discipline and executed bombing runs with professional competence. The Norden bombsights functioned mechanically as designed when crews could provide the stable platform and careful input the devices required. But accuracy suffered dramatically compared to training results. Bombs that should have struck specific factory buildings instead fell across residential areas, railroad yards, and open fields. Some bomb loads missed Schweinfurt entirely, impacting farms and villages miles from the intended target. The gap between doctrinal expectations and combat results became immediately, undeniably apparent. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Of the 315 bombers dispatched, 60 failed to return to England. 600 men were killed, wounded, or captured during a single mission. The losses exceeded 14%, a rate that would exhaust the entire bomber force within weeks if sustained. The ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt sustained damage but continued operating after repairs, German industry having already begun dispersing bearing production to alternate facilities that intelligence had not identified. The mission demonstrated that precision bombing against heavily defended targets without adequate fighter escort resulted in unsustainable losses, regardless of bombsight sophistication. Major Heinz Nock, a Luftwaffe fighter pilot who participated in interceptions against American bomber formations during 1943, recorded his observations in a diary that survived the war. His entry following attacks against American bombers reflected professional assessment of enemy capabilities, mixed with satisfaction that German defensive tactics proved effective against American bombing doctrine. Nock noted that American bombardiers demonstrated discipline during attacks despite heavy fighter opposition. The formations maintained cohesion through coordinated defensive fire, and bombers continued toward targets even when sustaining losses that should have prompted tactical retreat. This determination impressed German pilots even while confirming that American forces would accept substantial losses rather than abandoning mission objectives. The precision bombing doctrine clearly represented genuine strategic commitment rather than experimental theory that would be abandoned after initial setbacks. However, Nock and other Luftwaffe pilots observed that bombing accuracy deteriorated significantly under combat pressure. When formations executed evasive maneuvers to avoid concentrated flak, bomb patterns scattered widely. When attacking fighters forced bombardiers to divide attention between bombing procedures and defensive awareness, bombing precision suffered measurably. The theoretical advantages of sophisticated bomb sights meant little when combat conditions prevented their optimal employment. German intelligence assessments following the Schweinfurt raid concluded that previous analyses had proven essentially correct. The Norden Bombsight represented genuine technological sophistication and could produce impressive accuracy under favorable conditions. But combat over heavily defended German territory created circumstances that systematically degraded bombing accuracy, regardless of equipment capabilities. American willingness to accept severe losses demonstrated strategic determination, but also suggested that American planners had not yet recognized the fundamental impracticality of unescorted daylight precision bombing. This assessment proved partially accurate, while missing critical developments that would transform the strategic bombing campaign. American losses during summer and autumn 1943 indeed forced temporary suspension of deep penetration raids, while commanders reassessed tactics. But American industrial capacity and determination to continue daylight operations remained underestimated by German intelligence. More significantly, development of long-range escort fighters capable of accompanying bombers throughout entire missions, particularly the P-51 Mustang, with its exceptional range and performance, would fundamentally alter the strategic equation in ways that German defensive planning had not anticipated. The Schweinfurt raid represented the climax of one phase of the strategic bombing campaign, the moment when precision bombing doctrine collided with combat reality and revealed fundamental vulnerabilities in American planning. But this moment of German defensive success also represented the high point of Luftwaffe effectiveness against American daylight operations. Within months, escort fighters would arrive in sufficient numbers to fundamentally change the tactical situation. By spring 1944, American bombers would return to targets across Germany with continuous fighter escort, forcing German fighters to engage through screens of superior Allied fighters before reaching bomber formations. The Norden Bombsight's reputation would undergo substantial revision during subsequent years, as accumulated combat experience revealed both genuine capabilities and significant limitations. Under ideal conditions, with well-trained crews flying stable bombing runs without opposition, the device could produce remarkable accuracy. Under typical combat conditions with weather complications, defensive fire, and psychological pressure, actual accuracy fell far short of theoretical capabilities. Post-war analysis revealed that circular error probable during combat operations typically exceeded 1,000 feet, far worse than training results, but still sufficient for attacking large industrial complexes when attacking in formation with concentrated bomb loads. German confidence following Schweinfurt that defensive tactics had proven effective against American bombing doctrine proved justified in immediate tactical terms, but failed to account for American capacity to adapt, persist despite losses, and deploy resources that would eventually overwhelm German defensive capabilities through combination of technological improvements, tactical refinements, and overwhelming numerical superiority. The losses sustained during deep penetration raids throughout summer and autumn 1943 forced American bomber commanders to confront uncomfortable realities about precision bombing doctrine. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force from headquarters in England, faced mounting pressure from both subordinate commanders, witnessing crew losses firsthand, and superior officers in Washington, demanding results that justified the enormous resource investment in strategic bombing. The statistics told a sobering story. Between August and October 1943, the 8th Air Force lost more than 176 heavy bombers during missions against German targets, representing nearly 2,000 trained crew members killed, wounded, or captured. Replacement crews arrived from training facilities in America, but the experienced cadre that had developed tactical expertise through survival was being systematically destroyed faster than institutional knowledge could be transferred to newcomers. Bombardier training programs in America continued producing graduates confident in Norden Bombsight capabilities and precision bombing doctrine. These young officers arrived in England expecting to employ techniques learned during training under Texas skies. Veteran bombardiers who survived multiple combat missions understood the vast gulf between training conditions and combat reality, but struggled to articulate lessons that contradicted official doctrine. How could they explain that the sophisticated bombsight often proved less important than crew discipline, formation integrity, and sheer luck in determining mission outcomes? The psychological impact on bomber crews manifested in documented ways. Flight surgeons noted increasing stress symptoms among personnel completing multiple missions. The required 25-mission tour for rotation back to America seemed increasingly unattainable as loss rates climbed. Crews watched new arrivals complete 1 or 2 missions before disappearing, their aircraft lost over Germany with parachutes visible if they were fortunate, simply vanishing if they were not. The cumulative effect eroded the confidence that training had instilled. Mission planning adapted, gradually to operational realities that doctrine had not anticipated. Target selection shifted toward objectives that justified losses, even when bombing accuracy proved less than ideal. Planners scheduled missions based partly on weather forecasts, seeking conditions that might permit visual bombing while recognizing that European weather rarely provided the clear skies training had assumed. Formation tactics evolved through painful trial and error, crews discovering through experience which defensive arrangements provided best protection against coordinated fighter attacks. The Norden Bombsight itself became subject to more realistic assessment among crews who used it repeatedly under combat conditions. The device functioned mechanically as designed when provided proper inputs and stable flight conditions. But combat frequently prevented meeting these requirements. Bombardiers learned to make rapid estimates rather than precise calculations when circumstances prevented careful measurement. They learned to bomb on formation leaders when individual bombing proved impossible. They learned that survival sometimes required abandoning bombing procedures entirely to take defensive action against attacking fighters. General Henry Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces from Washington, faced difficult decisions about continuing daylight precision bombing operations, despite mounting evidence of severe tactical vulnerabilities. Abandoning the doctrine meant acknowledging that years of training, equipment development, and strategic planning had been fundamentally misguided. Continuing operations without modification meant accepting unsustainable losses. The solution ultimately required technological intervention that doctrine had not originally anticipated. long-range fighter escorts capable of accompanying bombers throughout entire missions. Development of drop tanks that extended fighter range had been underway before the crisis became acute, but the arrival of P-51 Mustangs in substantial numbers during early 1944 represented the critical development that transformed strategic bombing from a tactical failure into a sustainable campaign. The Mustangs' combination of long range, high performance, and availability in increasing numbers allowed American planners to continue daylight operations while providing bomber formations with continuous fighter protection. This solution validated aspects of precision bombing doctrine while fundamentally modifying its execution. Bombers would continue attacking specific industrial targets using Norden bombsights under daylight conditions, but they would do so under fighter escort that engaged German interceptors before they could attack bomber formations in strength. The bombsight's accuracy limitations remained, but formations dropping concentrated bomb loads could saturate target areas sufficiently to damage industrial facilities, even when individual bombing accuracy fell short of theoretical precision. The winter of 1943 to 1944 represented the nadir of confidence in precision bombing doctrine among those implementing it operationally, even as official communications continued emphasizing sophisticated American bombing capabilities. The gap between public statements and operational reality created cynicism among crews who understood through direct experience that actual combat bore limited resemblance to training or propaganda. Oberst Joseph Kamhuber's assessment of American bombing capabilities required substantial revision by spring 1944 as the operational situation transformed in ways German defensive planning had not adequately anticipated. The arrival of long-range American escort fighters in increasing numbers fundamentally altered the tactical equation that had previously favored German defenses during unescorted portions of bomber missions. German fighter pilots, who had grown accustomed to attacking bomber formations without significant fighter opposition, suddenly confronted escorts that accompanied bombers throughout entire missions. The P-51 Mustang proved particularly problematic for Luftwaffe interceptors. Its performance exceeded that of most German fighters at the altitudes where bomber combat occurred. Its range eliminated the sanctuary that German fighters had previously enjoyed when American escorts reached their fuel limits and turned back toward England. Most significantly, its availability in growing numbers meant that German fighters increasingly had to fight through escort screens before reaching bomber formations. The tactical implications became apparent quickly through mounting German fighter losses. Luftwaffe pilots who had developed effective tactics against bomber formations found themselves engaged by American fighters before reaching attack positions. The disciplined defensive formations that made bombers difficult targets became less relevant when escorts prevented German fighters from reaching bombers in the first place. Loss rates among German fighter pilots increased dramatically during spring and summer 1944, as the air war evolved from primarily bomber defense to fighter versus fighter combat that favored American numerical and performance advantages. German industrial planning, which had assumed that fighter defenses could limit bombing damage to manageable levels, faced systematic disruption as American raids continued with increasing frequency and effectiveness. The precision that Norden bombsights theoretically provided remained inconsistent in practice, but formation bombing by dozens or hundreds of aircraft carrying tons of high explosive created destruction sufficient to damage industrial facilities, even when individual bomb accuracy fell short of precision. The ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, attacked repeatedly during 1943 and 1944, sustained cumulative damage that disrupted production, despite German efforts to repair and disperse manufacturing. The attacks never achieved the catastrophic industrial collapse that precision bombing doctrine predicted, partly because German industry proved more resilient and adaptable than American planners assumed, and partly because bombing accuracy limitations meant that destruction remained incomplete. But the sustained pressure forced diversion of resources to repair, reconstruction, and dispersal that otherwise would have supported increased production. American bomber crews, meanwhile, continued operations with more realistic understanding of what Norden bombsights could achieve under combat conditions. Training programs gradually incorporated lessons from operational experience, though the gap between training conditions and combat reality remained substantial. Bombardiers learned to accept that combat accuracy would never match training results, and that their primary responsibility involved getting bombs reasonably close to target areas rather than achieving the pickle-barrel precision that mythology suggested. The psychological shift among American crews paralleled the tactical evolution. Initial confidence in technological superiority and doctrinal soundness gave way to more pragmatic understanding that survival required luck as much as skill, that equipment capabilities had limits regardless of sophistication, and that official doctrine often diverged significantly from operational practice. Veterans who survived multiple missions developed cynical appreciation for the gap between propaganda claims and combat reality, while maintaining professional discipline in executing missions, despite growing awareness of doctrine's limitations. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, which examined bombing campaign effectiveness through detailed investigation of German industrial records and physical damage assessment, revealed conclusions that complicated simple narratives about precision. Bombing success. The survey found that strategic bombing contributed significantly to German defeat through cumulative industrial disruption, transportation network destruction, and diversion of resources to air defense. However, specific precision attacks rarely achieved the decisive results that doctrine predicted. Area attacks against transportation infrastructure often proved more effective than precision strikes against specific factories, because transportation networks proved more difficult to repair and restore than discrete industrial facilities. The Norden Bombsight itself emerged from the war with reputation substantially diminished from pre-war claims, but still recognized as sophisticated equipment that provided genuine capabilities within realistic parameters. Under favorable conditions with well-trained crews, the device enabled bombing accuracy that exceeded unassisted visual bombing significantly. Under typical combat conditions, actual accuracy fell far short of theoretical capabilities, but remained sufficient for formation attacks against large industrial complexes. The myth of pickle-barrel precision dissolved under operational scrutiny, replaced by more realistic assessment of what mechanical computing aids could achieve under combat stress. Lieutenant Carl Norden Jr., whose mission over Berlin in March 1944 opened this account, survived his combat tour and returned to America in autumn 1944. His experiences over German targets bore limited resemblance to the confident expectations that training had instilled. The Norden Bombsight that bore his father's name had functioned as designed mechanically but proved unable to deliver the precision that pre-war claims suggested under the brutal realities of combat operations over defended territory. His father, Carl Norden Sr., continued working on bombsight refinements throughout the war, proposing modifications intended to improve accuracy and ease of operation. But the fundamental limitations that combat revealed stemmed less from mechanical shortcomings than from the impossibility of maintaining precision under conditions that training had never adequately simulated. No amount of engineering refinement could overcome the disruption caused by evasive maneuvers, the obscuration created by smoke and weather, or the psychological pressure of operating while aircraft exploded around you and cannon shells tore through your bomber's fuselage. The security measures surrounding the Norden Bombsight continued throughout the war despite German acquisition of intact examples that allowed detailed technical examination. This security theatre served purposes beyond protecting technological secrets that enemies already understood. It maintained confidence in American technological superiority among crews who needed to believe their sophisticated equipment provided advantages worth the risks they faced daily. It supported public narratives about precision bombing that justified the enormous resource investment in strategic air operations. And it created mystique around American bombing capabilities that may have influenced German planning even after technical secrets became known. The broader legacy of precision bombing doctrine and the Norden Bombsight proved complex and contested. American air power advocates argued that strategic bombing contributed decisively to German defeat through industrial disruption and resource diversion, even when specific precision attacks fell short of theoretical effectiveness. critics noted the enormous resources devoted to strategic bombing and questioned whether equivalent investment in other military capabilities might have produced greater return. The debate continued for decades after the war, with scholars analyzing bombing campaign effectiveness through increasingly sophisticated analytical frameworks, while veterans who participated understood through direct experience that reality had proved far more complicated than doctrine predicted. The irony that German intelligence correctly assessed many Norden Bombsight limitations while underestimating American determination to persist despite losses and adapt through technological solutions like escort fighters illustrates the difficulty of predicting operational outcomes based on technical capabilities alone. Wars are not won solely by superior equipment, but by the combination of technology, tactics, industrial capacity, training, adaptation, and determination to continue despite setbacks. American bombing campaigns ultimately contributed significantly to Allied victory, not because the Norden bombsight achieved its theoretical precision, but because American forces possessed resources and determination to sustain operations, until cumulative effects produced strategic results. The morning of March 6, 1944, when Lieutenant Norden hunched over his bombsight above Berlin, represented one moment in a vast campaign that would continue for another 14 months until German surrender. The device he used that morning performed within its actual capabilities while falling short of the promises that pre-war publicity suggested. The mission damaged some industrial facilities while missing others, killed some German civilians while leaving others unharmed, and contributed incrementally to the cumulative pressure that strategic bombing imposed on German capacity to continue the war. This complex, qualified success, achieved through adaptation, persistence, and overwhelming resource application rather than through technological precision alone, tells a more accurate story about American strategic bombing than myths about pickle-barrel accuracy from 20,000 feet. The Germans never expected the Norden bombsight to achieve its claimed precision under combat conditions, and in this skepticism they proved largely correct. But they also underestimated American willingness to accept costs, adapt tactics, and apply resources until doctrine's imperfect implementation produced cumulative strategic effects that contributed to ultimate Allied victory. The lesson, verified through thousands of combat missions and decades of historical analysis, suggests that technological sophistication alone rarely determines military outcomes. What matters, ultimately, is the combination of adequate technology, sound strategy, sufficient resources, effective adaptation, and determination to persist despite setbacks and contradictions between theory and practice. The Norden bombsight story, told honestly with its complications and contradictions preserved, illustrates these realities more clearly than simplified narratives about either American technological triumph or German defensive effectiveness. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.